Prime Minister, thank you very much for inviting us, welcoming us to your home, and for agreeing to have this conversation with us. Maybe I can open, sir, by just asking you how you're doing. How are you feeling now?
Thank you very much, and welcome to our Nyalgunga here. I'm really happy to have opportunity to talk to the media for the first time since I came back. And I want to say that I feel actually much better now. I was having quite a bit of pain around my waist and going around my legs all the way to my foot. And the doctor told me it's called spinal canal stenosis. Those are not the words. And what they did for me when they took me to Dubai, it's a minor procedure. It's called lumbar decompression and fusion to ease that the pain that I was having. So the operation itself takes some few hours, and then you need time to recuperate. Yes, but now I feel much better now. Yes.
Okay, but this obviously, because you're a man who is used to a hectic schedule, starting with the workout in the gym in the morning, all that now, you can't do any of that now.
No, why not? I mean, like this morning, just to give you an example, I've walked around the lap here. It is 3 kilometers. And I walked very well. I was jogging part of the distance. So I'm getting fitter right now, and shortly I'll be back in the gym. And there is not anything that I could do before that I cannot do now. Yes. I can do virtually everything. So, and that's why I'm saying I'm really now good to go. Yeah, I feel much better. I'm much stronger. I'm like renewed. I'm like a vehicle that has gone an overhaul.
So to start us off, sir, you have suffered for this country. You've been in the trenches for a long time. You've been in government, you've been in opposition, you've been in exile, you've been in detention. You are part of the tapestry of the country. And when you look at where we are now, are you disappointed at how we turned out?
I think that we've come from some very dark days in this country. But we've also seen light in this country. Yeah. And I would say that where we are right now is a transitional phase in our history, which is coming after we came up with a new constitution. So we have been in the process of implementing this new constitution, which was bound to be a major challenge. Because, the new constitution changed our governance order completely. What we had been used to from independence up to that time. So I would say it is an important phase in our country's history.
Is it your view that we could have done much better if we had a lot less corruption, if we had a lot more committed leadership, if we had more involved citizens?
Certainly we would have done better. But you also need to understand the background under which this actually came about. We first I think the major turning point was the 2002 elections, when for the first time we had a ruling party being replaced through an electoral process. And we moved in a mass movement that had brought in several groupings which had been fighting for change at that time. That was a government formed by the NAC, the National Rainbow Coalition. We started now bringing up reforms, and you can say that by and large a number of reforms were introduced. And the Kenyans would say that that period, up to the time that we came up with the new constitution, is probably the period where the government, actually, a lot of reforms were introduced. People will tell you that Kenya made more progress in that period of time, particularly the post-election period, the post-crisis period. Then came the new constitution. Now, after the 2013 elections, now the new government had the responsibility of now implementing the new constitution properly. Unfortunately, it came into power against the background of the ICC. In other words, it was coming into power in a crisis. So that crisis itself, in my view, is a major challenge to the incoming government. And we'll find that it's because of that a number of gains which had been achieved in the previous period were lost at that time. The fight against corruption had taken off very well in the period when we were in government. But then some people came up with an idea of creating a war chest to fight the ICC. And that, in my view, is how corruption now again found its way into this major league.
The war chest being taking public resources and putting them aside for use in the ICC process.
Yes, exactly. So, in my view, that itself is how the checks and balances were basically lost.
So if you were to compare the two governments in terms of the reforms implemented and in terms of development achievements, which one do you think you would score highly between Jubilee and between the NAC government?
I don't think it would be right to try to compare apples and oranges. Okay, but I would say that the major reforms in the several fields, for example, the fields of agriculture, in the fields of infrastructure development, healthcare, education, and so on, the foundations were laid in the Grand Coalition government, or that period, that era. And so I would say a lot was achieved at that period of time, given the fact that it was coming from a time when the economy had almost ground to a halt. So a lot of changes took place at that time and achievements, which to a certain extent the Jubilee government built on, but there are some areas where there were reversions of some of the achievements which have been made. And I've just pointed to you what in my view
corruption is one of them.
So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Prime Minister, so what is your vision for this country? You know, the median age for the average Kenyan is 19 years old. What is your vision for the country? Where should we be in 50 years? In terms of economy, in terms of leadership, in terms of our standing in the region, in terms of safety and security? What is your vision? What kind of country would be a fitting legacy for your long life of leadership and struggle?
I have said that, Kenya has got its peers in development. So they have got countries with which we can actually benchmark. At independence, I'll give an example. Kenya's economy was similar to that of Ghana and that of South Korea in major economic indicators. The size of the economy, the population, the level of poverty, the literacy levels, the levels of industrialization, and so on. Kenya and South Korea were almost at a similar level, comparable level. Now, 56 years down the road, Korea's economy is over 40 times larger than that of Kenya. You see, you ask yourself, what is it? What did the Koreans do right that we got wrong? Because if you answer that question, then you are in the way of answering Kenya's question or Kenya's problem, solving our problem.
And what do you think is the answer to that question? What is it that we did wrong and the Koreans did right?
Korea took off particularly after the coming into power of General Park Chung-hee, who was what they called him a benevolent dictator. But Park Chung-hee, first, they invested heavily in manpower development. And then they also looked at their own internal resources in agriculture. They came up with fundamental transformation of lives in the rural areas. You see, they came up by bringing the people together into villages where they could live together so that services could be provided to them. They could bring infrastructure closer, they could bring energy closer to the people. People themselves were providing labor to construct modern housing. Then there were schools, and there were health centers, and so on. And then that freed the land for large-scale agricultural production. So the country became self-sufficient in terms of food production. And then they also began to invest in industrialization, using the resources that they had themselves and also importing. So all this taken together made it possible for Korea to make that leap from a third world to a first world. Another example you can give is that of Singapore. Singapore actually came to Kenya for help in 1968. And they went there, and then they used whatever they had and transformed Singapore.
Are these examples that we can follow today? South Korea benefited from the fact that because of the Cold War and its position in alignment with America, give them preferential access to the American market and preferential access to American capital. Are those examples that an African country can replicate?
The Cold War was all over. It was in Asia, it was in Africa as well. So there were African countries which were pro-West. Kenya, for example, was pro-West. Tanzania followed more non-aligned status. Uganda, of course, has suffered for historical reasons that you know. But countries like DRC, Congo, were supposed to be pro-West. But look at where they are.
And many years later, they are still basket cases.
Yes. So I don't think that African countries have an excuse. We don't have an excuse. It is basically the poor leadership that we have had that has driven Africa to where it is today.
Does Africa have better leadership today than it did in the 1960s?
Of course they are. I don't think that African countries are uniform. There's other African countries which are very much forward-looking. You can look at countries like Ghana, in my view, has got a very progressive leadership today. Ethiopia is actually pulling up and becoming, growing pretty fast today. You can count them. There are several African countries which are doing well. There are those, of course.
Does Kenya have that kind of leadership?
You know,
today?
it's mixed. Right now, you know, we have a situation where, you know, you have the government which now is in power, and there are internal contradictions with that, the ruling party right now in the country. So I don't know whether you really want to be able to describe what it is like. I think that my view is I've talked with the President Uhuru seriously since we had that conversation about the handshake. And I think that he has got his mind in the right place.
So you think there is a chance that we could get the kind of leadership that has positioned Ghana and all these other countries favorably? Are you optimistic that we'll get that kind of leadership in 2022?
I don't want to talk about 2022.
Well, in the near future?
We have been, me and my colleague President Uhuru Kenyatta, we said we don't want to talk about 22. We want to come up with reforms that will make it possible for this country to transition to where it should be. And that we will not be engaging in campaigns as to who will be the president in 2022, who should lead. But if we have proper leadership, proper visionary leadership that some of these countries have had, there's no reason why Kenya cannot transition to where it rightly belongs.
Let me rephrase the question. What are you and the president doing to ensure that we have the right leadership this time around?
We don't want to pick leadership. At the moment, we want to create a conducive environment through which Kenyans can get proper leadership. Okay? And then we don't just want it to be dependent on individual. Because once you've created the proper environment and conditions, nobody would come in and just tamper around. You know, you can see, for example, in Korea right now, the former president, the lady, is in jail. You see? So you create a governance structure that will ensure that nobody can abuse power. You know, there are limits to abuse of power. There are checks and balances properly in the system. And that's what we're trying to do. That is what BBI is aimed at achieving.
Let me ask about the geopolitics and the conditions and the changing circumstances in the region, and all these other influences that are coming into the region. Also the changes in Ethiopia, the fact that we can't seem to get along with Tanzania. How do you read this? How is this region going to be in the next 10 years? And will Kenya still have influence and prestige in the region, or are we going to lose our position?
I don't think that we are in any danger of losing our leadership position in this region. We enjoy a very good relationship with most of our neighboring countries. We don't have problems with Ethiopia. Neither do we have serious problem with Uganda, South Sudan, or even with Tanzania. I think what you are talking about, kind of stormy relationship with Tanzania, in my view is like a storm in a teacup. We don't have any problem with Tanzania. Our relationship has been very friendly. it is just over this issue of COVID, about whom to allow in and whom not to allow in. It's a minor issue. It's not a very serious issue as such. Remember, President Uhuru Kenyatta went to visit Magufuli last year in his hometown of Chato. And Magufuli presented him with peacocks as a sign of friendship and peace. And that has not changed. So we don't
I noticed, though, that when we were seeking the Security Council seat, some of them didn't vote for us.
Every country takes decisions on the basis of its strategic national self-interest. Okay? So that does not mean that it has a problem with us as such. After that vote, all of them congratulated Kenya for winning. So we really don't have a problem.
I just wonder, when you look at the Kenya's political landscape, is there anyone who reminds you of a younger version of Raila?
We have got a number of young people who are coming up, who want change. Of course, they are growing up, or they are grown up in completely different circumstances. You know, quite a number of them are now maturing when issues that made us fairly rebellious are no longer there. The restrictive state, that heavy hand of the state that would compel you not to do A, B, C, D, is no longer there. But there's something which is now coming in among our youth, which was not there in those days. The love for money. I think that this is a dangerous development in our country, where people do things not out of principle. And you can see this even in our representatives, both at the county level and at the national level, in parliament. That members of parliament are asking for money, to be paid money to do something. That's never happened in our days. People came out to do something in public interest. And public servants, like members of parliament, should not be doing things because they're being paid to do so. Okay, so it is a very bad example for the youth in a society. See, when people adore and worship money, that basically is the beginning of corruption. And corruption really thrives in that kind of society, because people do some things not because it is the right thing to do, it's because there is money in doing it. And to me, this is something that we need to shun in our society.
So now maybe we can do some retail business. And I think the burning question now is on the revenue sharing controversy in the House, in the Senate. And you have supported the CRA formula, which is being proposed now. And the question is, the formula disadvantages the coast and the north, which are basically regions that are marginalized. Why do you think this is a fair approach to take, as proposed by the say, revenue sharing authority?
You see, if you read our constitution, it was written against a background of historical injustices, historical marginalization of certain regions in this country. And this is not just from independence. It goes beyond independence. When we were going to school in the colonial days, you drew a map of Kenya, then you put a ruler from Turkana right up to Lamu, and you wrote on top there NFD, Northern Frontier District. There was nothing like a town or anything there in that area. Kenya only existed below that line. And Kenya was created by the railway line at the advent of colonialism. So that marginalization started at that time. And part of the coast, as you know, was not a colony. It was a protectorate. That's why it was called Colony and Protectorate of Kenya. It was ruled by the Sultan of Zanzibar. So now, after independence, we now created one nation called Kenya. But then came this idea, which was invented in 1965, which was saying that the government should invest more in high-yielding areas, which would have high rates of return, as opposed to marginalized regions, and that those regions will benefit through a trickle-down effect of development in the other areas. That perpetuated this disparity. That's why when we were at Bomas, there's a lot of discussion on how to right in the wrongs inflicted in our country through historical marginalization. At the same time, you do not want to hold the other areas, that you should now mark time and wait for these other areas to come and catch up. So you need to allow these other areas also to grow, okay? So what we are talking about is not equality, we're talking about equity. Equity in terms of allocation of resources. Now, but the reason why this is happening is because the government, because of the state of the economy today, was not adding more money to the counties. You stuck at 316 billion shillings. And this is in a 3 trillion budget. So that is about 10%. Yet the constitution has said minimum 15%. Okay? When we were discussing during this BBI, we were proposing to increase it to 35%. And then, see, the other problem which nobody is mentioning is that there are several functions which have been devolved, but which are still being held by the national government. And because of this, the funds are being held at the national government and are not available down there. And that's why you'll see that a lot of money that is being devolved goes to recurrent rather than development, okay? But if we devolve more funds, then percentage of recurrent will be smaller compared to the percentage that will go for development in the counties, okay? But then it is the issue of equity. So what was proposed, what we are proposing, was that it should not be a winner and a loser. It should be a win-win situation right now. And that's the reason why the amendment was being proposed, that you do not implement any formula now until more resources are made available. So the counties, no county will lose. Each county will get the same amount of money they got in the last financial year. CRA should go back to the drawing board and look at that formula again afresh and take some of these economic activities into account, that may come up with a more balanced distribution of resources than is the case at the moment.
There is a general perception, probably more than just a perception, that the opposition in this country today is weak. And you, of all leaders, would recognize the dangers of having a system that does not have a strong opposition. Do you think the situation now is ideal, where there is no clear distinction between who is in the opposition and who is in government?
I don't agree that the opposition is weak. So people have not understood the system of government that we adopted now as compared to, we had a parliamentary system before. Now we have got a presidential system.
Yeah.
Presidential system, power is divided between executive, legislature, and judiciary. Now, the legislature oversights the executive as a whole. In other words, even the members of the party in government who are in parliament also oversight the government. It's not adversarial.
It's not
the way it is in the Westminster type, where you got opposition benches and government benches, and the opposition is now the one that is oversighting the government. In a presidential system, the legislature as a whole has a responsibility to oversight government. That's why you've got those committees in the House where membership is shared. You see? So this is something that even the media has not understood in this country. You see? So there's nothing like opposition is weak here. Parliament is weak as an institution, in my view. That's what it is.
But if you, Prime Minister, if you look at the dysfunction, for example, in a country that has perfected the presidential system in the US, what's happening between the Republicans and the Democrats vis-a-vis President Trump? Do you think there's any likelihood, for example, that the Republicans will be openly critical of Trump? So, and there are dangers then, even in this system, in the assumption that Parliament as a corpus, as a whole, would oversight the executive.
Yeah, you see, in the US, you find sometimes Republican members talking critical of the government. Even like you saw that impeachment, there's a Republican member who voted.
Yes, the former presidential candidate.
Yes. So what you're saying is that even right now, when motions are brought in before the House, there are members of like our party who oppose those motions and even vote against, and they also expose wrongdoings of the government as Parliament. So I don't see this idea which you said that there's no opposition. There's a clear distinction between opposition and the ruling party. Okay, but it is the system that we're having, which is not working the way it should be working properly. You see, those committees, which, for example, we have, it should be coming up with proper exposition of the wrongdoings which is happening.
So, are we still going to have a referendum? Do you think, or do you think The reggae has stopped.
The reggae has not stopped. I said that the reggae was on half time because of the COVID, and that it will start very shortly. By the time the COVID hit us, we had more or less completed most of the country. We only remained in Nakuru and then Nairobi. And thereafter, we were going to present the report to the country. Yes. What has happened is, in the meantime, the steering committee has concluded its work, and the report is ready, which we are going to receive shortly. When we receive that report, we will make it public, and there will be discussions about that report. And my understanding is that the report will be in 3 parts. During the consultations that we were holding around the country, and also which the steering committee was holding, there were certain recommendations which were made by people about certain issues that were affecting their lives that required some action. There will be issues that require pure executive action, administration. Those will be isolated and forwarded to the government, national county government for implementation, for action. There are issues which require either amendment of existing laws or promulgation of new laws. So those will come in the form of bills, and those bills will be taken to the Parliament, and Parliament will be given a time frame within which to pass those laws. Then there may be a few issues that require a referendum, and those ones now will be taken to the, you follow the normal procedure, going to the IBC, and then going to the counties, assemblies, and National Assembly, and the referendum. And we're hoping that this can be done and concluded by end of the year, before end of the year.
By the end of this year? Okay, okay. Would there be a situation where you would support having the referendum question together with the election in 2022?
Not at all. It's never done. How do you have a referendum question with an election? I'm about to be told where it has been done.
Well, I think in the US they normally have, but this is at the state level, they normally have these questions. Would you like us to legislate marijuana, for example, or some other local level issue?
But it's never at national level referendum, because already we have 6, ballots, and we want to introduce another one. It will be very confusing. So this matter must be resolved before you go for an election.
Would that be based on the assumption that some of the proposals that would be passed in such a referendum would take effect immediately after the election or at the next election?
I don't want to anticipate, because I have not seen the report. Which ones will take effect after, or which ones will come before. But I'm hoping that a number of them will become effective immediately after referendum. Some of them may take effect after the elections.
Okay. I think I will change gears now and maybe talk about COVID, which is a monumental issue, because it's not just a public health issue, it's also an economic issue. There are many families in this country that are suffering. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs, and even more people who are working either without pay or on half pay. Do you think we have managed this as a country well? In your own opinion, have we managed the situation well? Both the public health dimension and the economic side?
I think one can say without fear of contradiction that we have done fairly well in this country. I think the government has taken this as an emergency right from the word go when the first case was reported and took action immediately, because it was at that time that immediately they announced that there will be a lockdown and started restrictions of movement of people and started this mass testing of people and making daily announcements. And you can see that from that time up to today, no day passes without the government informing the country of what is happening in the country. So I think the government has done pretty well by comparison.
What about the management of the funds in the fight against the disease? Because we are reporting now that there are questions as to how that money has been used.
You see, this was like an emergency, and people are dying, and you need certain things quickly. See, this thing took virtually everybody by surprise. So no country could have prepared for what was going to come, even to stockpile the supplies that were required, for preventive purposes, protective purposes. Okay? So once now, all of a sudden people require millions of these people requires sanitizers, you need ventilators, and so on and so forth. So it is emergency. And procurement. I read what's going on in the media. Some I sympathize with, but there are some I don't sympathize with. You're talking about farms which will be given a contract to supply and so on, suggesting that the government should deal only with established companies with track record and so on and so forth. You're basically promoting monopoly. And when we are saying that we need also to promote the youth in the country, those who are coming, when are they going to become also entrepreneurs? And if somebody goes through the and says, I can supply this, you cannot verify the ability. You give an order. If you can supply, you'll be paid upon delivery, so long as it meets certain specifications and standards. How does that become a loss of government? How does it become a loss that the government has given somebody a tender? The only problem would be if you're creating some monopoly, you're giving some people a bigger order and other people are not getting. Okay? But in my view, this is the opportunity for their youth also to get an opportunity to get involved. If you can go and make these masks in quantities that meet the specifications for protection and deliver and be paid on time, I don't see anything wrong with it. So this is a time for our people to be more innovative. And maybe this is also a time for us to think of developing our own pharmaceutical industries. See, we keep on importing these generics from India, from China and so on, which you can make here without having to pay a lot of money in terms of royalties. You see, this is a time to challenge our people. Remember, we used to have a budding pharmaceutical industry here. Dawa Pharmaceuticals was here. But the structural adjustment program came and killed all those initiatives which were coming up in the country. So I've become a net importer of drugs from India. You know, we are exporting jobs to those destinations instead of creating jobs here in our country. This is the time when we can actually challenge our youth, our people, to get involved those ways. The other one I would suggest is that we need to use digital technology and challenge our youth, our people, you know.
Okay, now finally on the COVID situation, your friend President Magufuli has taken a slightly different approach to what the rest of the world has done. And basically, there is no sense of crisis in Tanzania. These are the things that we are doing, masks and sanitizing and washing our hands and social distancing. There isn't any of that. What do you make of that approach?
Could you spare me the need of talking about Tanzania? Every nation has got its strategic self-interest. So I don't want to support or to criticize what my friend Magufuli is doing in Tanzania. That is basically purely an internal affair of the Republic of Tanzania and its people.
Although it does have consequences for the neighbors, because you know the border is porous and the economies are integrated. There's a high volume of movement between the entire region, and I think that's why President Kagame was saying that that maybe this would have been done a little bit better if there was coordinated action across the region. Because you know, if there is a problem in Somalia, it will get into Kenya through the border. If there is uncontrolled transmission in Tanzania, it will get into Kenya through the border.
I've actually told President Uhuru that this is an issue they should discuss at the summit level of the East African heads of states and come up with a solution that is beneficial to all the member states of the community. So I think that is the platform where this matter should be handled.